timer is a cheat that speeds up the client's internal clock, basically allowing the cheater's game to run in fast-forward time, while the server still thinks time is normal. This allows me to eat, break blocks, move, and attack much faster than normal. We can change how much our clock speed is sped up in the settings, where 1 is the normal clock speed. So at 2, I'm able to do everything twice as fast. I can also change the setting to less than 1, which would slow down my game. This might seem like a useless feature, but we will see a potential use case for it later in the video. In this video, our goal is to create a check that can detect the timer cheat. However, before we can do that, we must understand what ticks are. In Minecraft, the fundamental unit of time is 1 tick, which is 50 milliseconds. This means there are 20 ticks per second. Normally, the client will send 1 movement packet to the server every tick to update its location to the server, which means 20 movement packets are being sent per second. Now that we understand tick rate, we can talk about the timer cheat. Timer works by increasing the client's tick rate, which means a 1.5x timer will increase the client's tick rate from 20 to 30 ticks per second. This will also cause 30 movement packets per second to be sent instead of the usual 20. We can exploit this deviation from normal behavior to detect timer. If more than 20 movement packets are being sent every second, then we can flag the player for using timer. My first attempt was to track 1-second windows and count the number of movement packets that we receive in every 1-second window. If we receive more than or equal to 22 movement packets in 1 second, then we will increment a buffer. Otherwise, we will decrement the buffer, and we will flag the player if the buffer reaches a certain threshold. The reason that we need to use 22 as the threshold instead of 21 is because even under legit circumstances, 21 movement packets can be sent in 1 second due to imprecisions in the game code. This is the actual code, which replicates exactly what I just showed on the slide. I won't be explaining it in the video, but you can view it in the GitHub repository by yourself. We will now test this implementation in-game and see how low of a timer greater than 1 we are still able to detect. Notice that we're not really interested in the case where the timer is less than 1, because it doesn't benefit the player much to slow down their game clock. I added some debugging messages to print out how many movement packets we're receiving in the last second. Notice that even when timer is off, the number of movement packets will sometimes be 21, which is why we had to set our threshold to greater than or equal to 22 in the check. Our check is able to detect timer speeds as low as 1.06, as you can see here. The number of movement packets being received is consistently exceeding 22, which is causing the buffer to increase, which will eventually flag the check. However, if we decrease our timer speed to 1.05, we can see that our check is no longer able to flag this. This is because the number of movement packets received keeps alternating between 21 and 22, and the buffer is being decremented when the number of movement packets received is 21. This is obviously a problem, as we are hoping to detect timer speeds as low as 1.01, which is the slowest possible timer speed. That still exceeds 1. Another problem with this check is that it can create false positives against laggy players. It's difficult for me to demonstrate this because the server is running on my local machine, so I have 0 lag, but I'm trying my best using the fake lag module on Vape, which simulates a laggy environment. When a player is lagging, the packets can become queued and delayed, which means that packets from 1 second might be delayed into the next second, and then a flood of packets gets sent all at once in the next second. For example, this happened once up here, when the number of movement packets received suddenly became 37 instead of the usual 20, which was caused by packet queuing. This caused the buffer to suddenly skyrocket to 16, which caused me to fail the check immediately. This would happen a lot more if I was genuinely lagging and not using this fake lag module. So because our previous approach has so many false positives and false negatives, we need to come up with something new. We can keep track of a balance for each player that starts at 0 and increases or decreases based on their actions. How we change the balance is that when we receive a movement packet, we will check how much time has elapsed since their last movement packet. Then we will add 50 minus this elapsed time to the player's balance. Why does this work? Recall that we expect 1 movement packet every 50 milliseconds from the player under normal conditions. So, If the client is sending packets faster than this, then it is a sign of timer, and we will increase their balance as a result, flagging them when they reach an arbitrary threshold of 250. This check is both much more precise than the previous one and will not false flag laggy players. This is because when packets are being queued or delayed, the balance can go negative, and then when the flood of packets comes later, the negative balance serves as a buffer to prevent the balance from going above the threshold. We can now playtest this check in-game, where I have a logging message to print out the player's balance in the chat. As you can see here, I had a lag spike, and the balance went into the negatives as the packets were being delayed, and then it went back up to the normal balance of around 20 once the delayed packets were sent. You can see that even if I turn my timer to the lowest possible setting of 1.01, the balance will still steadily climb until eventually it will reach the threshold of 250 and flag the player. This is what I meant by saying this check is much more precise than the previous one. It can detect timer at the lowest possible setting. Now I would like to show an exploit that I found earlier when I was testing. So by turning the timer down to the lowest possible speed of 0.1, I can accumulate a very large negative balance, which will allow me to later use the 2.0 timer for a long time without being flagged. So my balance keeps accumulating into the negatives since my game speed is so slow. And then once I turn my timer to 2, I'll be able to use this for a long time before the balance goes back up to 250. However, this is easily fixed by setting a minimum possible balance of around negative 1000. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and please consider liking and subscribing.